Hello, I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Welcome to Full Measure. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is the largest peacetime military organization in the world. Formed just after World War II, it's an alliance of the U.S. and 27 other North American and European countries. Led by a U.S. general or supreme allied commander, they pledge all for one and one for all against enemy attacks. Now NATO itself is coming under something of an attack. Donald Trump is leading the charge, calling NATO obsolete. We'll talk with him about that in just a few minutes. But first, the U.S. today is increasing its spending on NATO, sending more arms and troops on a scale not seen since the Cold War. The reason? Russia's rising military presence in Eastern Europe. NATO forces and Russian troops are massing along that border in the modern version of the Cold War Part 2. We sent Scott Thuman on an exercise with U.S. troops in Estonia.
What you are seeing and hearing isn't any ordinary military exercise, nor is the setting. A remote section of woods in Tapa, Estonia, some 75 miles from the Russian border. It is where these 170 U.S. soldiers, as the saying goes, are hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. By training with live rounds, putting high-tech Striker vehicles through the paces, and shattering the otherwise silent countryside with the deafening sounds of detonating IEDs. Captain Joe Vanderlip is the Iron Troop commander.
I think there are conditions out there that have prompted our response, and the decision makers within Washington, within the Pentagon, have deemed it appropriate that, hey, there's enough going on in the world right now that we need to forward move units to assure the NATO alliance.
What, you ask, could matter so much in the far-off Baltics that U.S. forces are suddenly bulking up? It is fear over Vladimir Putin's supposed aspirations to retake what the Soviets lost after the Cold War, and what many believe he may be willing to grab again by force. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, all worried Russia will do to them what it has done in Ukraine over the past 2 years. And since this is what some call the Eastern Front of the free world, the U.S. Army's 2nd Cavalry and NATO forces came with rifles in hand to send a message.
This could be much bigger, couldn't it?
It could be, yes, and it can be scaled up and down. We see now that the publish from the Pentagon is, yes, there will be heavy brigades, armored brigades coming over here for 9-month back-to-back rotations. I think that is a pretty firm commitment to the United States involvement within the Baltics.
This thawing, though, of Cold War strategies is not just for show, according to General Ben Hodges, the head of U.S. Army forces in Europe. He supports a plan for a constant and dramatically increased presence in what would be the biggest U.S. deployment to Eastern Europe since the Cold War. Some 250 tanks and fighting apparatus, more than 1,500 wheeled vehicles like Humvees, and the most important number, 4,200 U.S. soldiers. One monumental show of strength. And the Estonians couldn't think of a louder voice to have on their side than American firepower.
What we're seeing on this side of the border with U.S. forces is reportedly taking place on the Russian side as well, with Moscow mobilizing its men and weapon systems.
For troops in the Baltic states trying to deter a Russian invasion, the arrival of even this small number of U.S. soldiers is like the cavalry coming to the rescue.
Everybody sees that, and that's good. Very happy, I think. Yeah, I am actually. We can cooperate with you.
While some call true battle highly unlikely, plenty contend that's not the point. Russia has roots in the Ukraine and has long relied on the Baltics, Belarus, and Ukraine as its buffer zone against potential European foes. U.S. combat forces on border states with Russia is something that could trigger a reaction from Putin. With Russian forces pulling out of Syria, some say stronger action in Ukraine is coming. This potential Putin versus the world standoff has reinvigorated debate about NATO and America's place in it, currently footing the biggest portion of the bill while other nations fail to meet their spending quotas. President Obama met with NATO's Secretary General on Monday in the Oval Office to publicly bolster support.
NATO continues to be the linchpin, the cornerstone of our collective defense and U.S. Security policy.
On the ground in Estonia, the new generation on the front lines with Russia wasn't even born the last time the Soviet Union and NATO faced off in the original version of the Cold War. Second Lieutenant Matthew Chapman is a soldier in a strange land.
As a 23-year-old from New Jersey, I never thought in a million years that I'd be here.
Richard Stotts is sergeant in the 3rd Platoon, and like any sergeant through the ages, marches according to orders.
Being in the American Army, you gotta be ready for anything. So it doesn't really surprise me that we've changed our mindset and trying to get back into it.
The Cold War suddenly heating up.
Scott Thuman joins us now. Scott, NATO has a lot of shared costs and responsibilities, and the Secretary General was in town recently facing some tough questions from Congress about all of that.
Well, Sharyl, you could predict it was going to be heavily scrutinized. It comes with a $3.4 billion price tag, one the Pentagon has greenlighted, but Congress has the final say. If Congress does approve, you could see this plan implemented within a year. Sharyl?
Scott Thuman, thanks. Next on Full Measure, Donald Trump on NATO and what else he'll do on the southern border besides build a wall. But what's their incentive to do so?
Well, they have no incentive because right now the United States doesn't know how to deal. But I know what the incentive is.